Vint and Steve share a very fundamental belief that the best approach to internet governance is through a very light touch. Excuse me, with no government having any greater voice than any other. So both feel that the success of the ICANN stewardship transition was a major milestone in the history of the internet. In essence, it marked the time when the US government said this so-called ICANN experiment was a success. Steve has said on more than one occasion that a great deal of credit for the transition goes to Larry Strickling, the former head of the US National Telecommunications Information Administration. In Steve's words, if Larry hadn't been head of NTIA, there's a very good chance the transition would not have happened. So with that, please welcome Larry Strickling.
Well, thank you, Brad, and I want to thank ICANN and Joran Marby for inviting me to speak in tribute to Steve Crocker, and I also want to especially thank Secretary General Zal for making the time to come, and thank you for your kind words. I'm here, and I'm very honored to speak in tribute of Steve Crocker. As the administrator of NTIA, I've worked with Steve throughout his service as chairman of the ICANN board from his election in 2011 until this past January. We worked closely on many issues during those 5 years, but none more important than the ICANN transition. Let me just make the conclusion you all know and already believe. Steve is a giant of the internet. His career spans the entire history of the internet. Early on, he created the concept of requests for comments and authored RFC1 back in 1969. And as board chair, he was present last fall for the ending of the final IANA functions contract between ICANN and NTIA. That is an impressive set of milestones. Vint referred to them as bookends, but I think Steve's got more in him, so I don't think we're ready to bookend his career yet. So I think we'll just call them milestones and sit back and wait to see what comes next. But I'd like to focus on just a few of the attributes and personal values that have made Steve such a strong leader of the internet and a particularly effective chairman of the Internet Board. First, I find it particularly apt that Steve's first involvement with ICANN was to chair the Security and Stability Advisory Committee starting in 2002. I think all of us who know and have worked with Steve would rank stability as among the highest of his character traits. And projecting that stability to the internet community during the IANA transition planning was absolutely critical to the plan's ultimate success. The IANA transition effort was the largest and most intense multi-stakeholder planning effort in history. Nothing of that scale had ever been attempted before. We had no playbook, but we had plenty of challenges and surprises that arose during the process. But throughout it all, Steve projected a sense of stability that helped reassure the community as it developed and reached consensus on the plan that paved the way for the ending of the IANA functions contract with the United States. In his interview for the ICANN History Project, which, if you don't know, is a series of videos about the history of ICANN that I urge everyone to take a look at. But in Steve's video, he said that he was always quite optimistic that the transition would happen. And I'm sure that that optimism stemmed directly from the sense of stability that Steve brought to the effort. The second attribute I want to highlight is Steve's commitment to accountability and transparency. I worked with Steve on the second Accountability and Transparency Review Team in 2013 and got to see firsthand his personal views on these issues. For ICANN, the path to accountability and transparency has been a long journey. It's not been perfect, but it is now one that is embedded in ICANN bylaws. And I have said before and continue to believe that ICANN is one of the most accountable and transparent organizations I have ever worked with. And as Steve has said, achieving accountability and transparency is a continuous process. It's never over. And finally, building on that idea of process, I want to quote something Steve wrote when he drafted that first RFC back in 1969. At the very top of the document, Steve wrote, quote, Very little of what in here is firm, and reactions are expected. And I think what this reflects is that Steve, from the beginning of his career, understood how much and how fast the internet would evolve. He has embraced the need for evolution, the need for innovation, and the need for change, and he understood that growth depended on not insisting on firmness, but rather expecting and asking for reactions from all stakeholders. That mindset, shared by many in the global internet community, has led to the miracle that is today's internet. Thank you, Steve, for the privilege of working with you for 6 years and for the leadership that you've provided as board chair, and best of luck to you on your next challenge. Thank you.